If you've been watching my channel for long enough, you might remember my first big controversial video. It's time to kill Create React app. I made this video really early in my channel because I was just so frustrated seeing people get started with tech that was objectively really far behind and kind of setting them up for failure. I figured this problem would be solved in a few months. It wasn't. That was back when I started my channel. That was back before I had a mustache and my hair was still super long and I was in my original apartment before I had a studio. It was a while ago. I was planning on doing a very different video than what you're watching now, because up until recently, it looked like Create React app was going to stick around for a while, and I was frustrated beyond belief. I was flaming people. I was in the GitHub issues. I was not happy. This issue got cut by Mark. If you're not familiar with Mark here, this isn't the Mark that works with me on T3 chat stuff. This is the Mark that does a lot of the React Redux management. He made an issue saying that it's time to kill Create React app, deprecate it, mark it as deprecated, and keep beginners from running into problems. There was some pushback, but I jumped in. As an educator in the space, Create React app's lack of deprecation notice is a consistent stumbling block for new devs and inexperienced React users. It's an unnecessary harm to the entire ecosystem, and it's so easy to mitigate. I'm sorry, guys. There's no excuse. It's time to mark this project as deprecated. We have a lot to talk about here, from the history of Create React app and why it exists to how these problems are going to finally be solved. Before we can do all that, let's quickly hear a word from today's sponsor. We need to talk about the great evil that most web devs fear, the thing that haunts us in our nightmares. Tables. Specifically, tables that have a lot of deep interactions built within them. Setting up a table properly is not easy, especially in modern frameworks. And once you get to more complex grids and visualizations, it falls apart. That's why today's sponsor is a component. Yes, a component is sponsoring because AG Grid is that good. The free tier is more than enough for almost everything you're building. It's also open source. Go check it out. But I just want to show it to you really quick. Works with every framework, and it works. Everything you'd ever need, from filtering to sorting to super complex visualizations. Setting something up like this properly with all these updates happening on the fly without dropping a single frame is not particularly easy to do. And this isn't some random startup. AG Grid is very, very legit. Over 90% of Fortune 500 companies use AG Grid, and the other 10%, honestly, they're probably making a mistake because it is the best library for doing these types of complex charts. They're so confident in it that they're the lead sponsor with their biggest open source competition, TanStack Table, as in the only major partner for it, which is pretty nuts. But they're doing that because they want the whole ecosystem to do better. They want the best possible grids available for all the use cases you might possibly want. So if you want a minimal open source solution you can do everything yourself with, go check out TanStack Table. If you want a table that has everything included, that even Tanner himself says is the best and gold standard enterprise-ready solution for building data grids, AG Grid is really hard to beat. Everything you see here is free and open source. You only have to pay for the enterprise plugins, which are also source available. So go give it a shot. You'll be surprised at how impressed you are. Thank you to AG Grid for sponsoring today's video. Check them out today at soydev.link/aggrid. Before we go too deep into Create React app's death, I want to talk about its life. Why did Create React app exist in the first place? Why does this thing exist that is so terrible that people should never use it? Well, when React started, things were very different. We didn't have a bunch of tools for building our JavaScript. The idea of building JS was still not really a thing. We had some tools that would minify your JS and a little bit of bundling. Browserify was starting to become a thing, but your JavaScript that you wrote was effectively the JavaScript that the user got. We didn't have compilers that were transforming things like JSX and types and bringing in all these crazy libraries. You just wrote the JS and shipped it. When React was first announced, you can see what the syntax looked like here. We had classes that extended React component. Classes still weren't officially part of JS, so they had to implement their own thing for it. And you would call react.render with your component with this JSX syntax. People were livid. People were very, very unhappy to see this other weird syntax in React code. Here's a fun post on HN from a while ago. I really enjoy React's concepts, but I have one nit to pick with it, and it's meta. Mixing grammars in a single buffer really hoses syntax highlighting and indentation in Emacs. I'd much prefer to be able to require the JSX where I need it and have the right context passed to it. Not the pushback I was looking for, but if I can't find it, I'll need you guys to just trust me. People were very, very unhappy with JSX. If you're gonna hate on React for some reason, make it something other than JSX. But what if I do hate JSX? Yeah. The OG days of React were terrifying to people because changing the syntax of JS was It was a faux pas. It was a no. It's a thing you're not supposed to do just yet. So because of that, React needed tools that other things didn't. If you were writing with jQuery, you didn't need a bundler, you didn't need a compiler, you didn't need all these other parts. If you're writing with React, you did, which meant that using React usually meant you needed other things. You need a bundler of some form. You need a JSX transpiler of some form. You probably need a linter to make sure that you're following the rules of React, especially once hooks happened. You also need a way to bind the HTML file to that React code. And ideally, you had a way to debug things too. There was a lot of little pieces that React required that weren't the norm yet. Because these things weren't really the norm yet, the likelihood that you would set all of them up just to try out React for the first time was nearly zero. Getting started with React when it first came out was not a fun task. There were so many different steps that it took to build and bundle and get it all working just so you could do a quick hello world in React. And that is why Create React App was originally created. The goal of CRA was to make it so all of these things would be largely handled for you. It would bring in Webpack for the bundler. It'd bring in Babel for the JSX transpiler. It'd bring in ESLint for the linter. It wouldn't bring in some of the other things you need because you also need a router, but they didn't pick one. So you'd use React Router, almost everyone would, but it didn't come with one. It didn't come with a test framework. I think eventually they started putting more testing stuff in it, but at the time it did not. Didn't come with a style solution because React doesn't have any opinions on how you do styles. That was your problem to figure out. You needed to solve all of these problems. And Create React App was proposing a solution to the things that most aggressively blocked you from getting started, which were these guys. And this seemed like a really good thing at the time. That said, all of these parts are relatively complex. And if you were to include all of them in your code base, then you're getting started for a React app would have like 50 files in it. You'd feel like you're starting a Laravel app. And if you're here, that's probably not the thing you want to be doing. You probably want something minimal and simple, like when you init with Create Next App. However, when you do run Create React App, like if I go run it now, npm create React app at latest, CRA test. So the keys in the install here are React and React DOM, which are both part of React itself, but also React scripts, which is not part of React at all. React scripts is one of the handful of interesting things that the React team came up with, and the Create React team especially came up with, in order to make it less likely that we have weird problems. Oh, look at that. You can't even init because it tries to install React 19 and is not happy with that for testing library, which is the testing stuff that they included. So we'll cd into CRA test. I'll go bump down to React 18 so it shuts up. npm install. Did it give a warning when I tried running it that it's deprecated? It did not. It should. Hopefully it will soon. So when we look at this project, you'll see there isn't too much. We have the public, which has like logos and whatnot. We have source, which has, I would argue, too many files, but nothing too specific to config. But there's also a specific script here, eject. I'm going to run that. Actually, I'm going to commit this first. Cool. So I initted before we ejected. Now we're going to npm run eject. Ejecting is permanent. Oh boy. Hopefully this is not the wrong thing to do. Once we've done that, you'll notice there's a lot more stuff here. You'll also notice we have this config folder, and there's a lot more stuff in here. And we have scripts, and there's a lot of stuff here too. If I was to make this diff, you know what? Here's what we'll do. Good old GitHub CLI taking just as many steps as it obviously needs to. Just to emphasize how absurd ejecting is, that is almost 2,000 lines of code that are now part of your code base forever. And if anything ever needs to change in any of those, like the way envs are handled changes with new node versions, or Webpack changes and your Webpack config has to be a little different, it's hell. Managing all of this sucks. And I'm saying that confidently because I did this at Twitch. It was hellish managing the upgrade from Webpack 2 to 4. I wouldn't wish this stuff on my worst enemy. But if you didn't eject, you had almost no customization because that React scripts package just takes all of these default configs and makes them one thing, giving you almost no access to change it. They tried to give you some level of extensions over time, but they were just not reliable or well maintained because the expectation is that you would eject. It was not great. That said, the fact that you could have a good working config that effectively hid this whole part from you, so you don't have to think about it. You just moved on with your day. You could focus on adding these parts. Hell, they even include the test framework. So you just added the router, you added your own style solution, and you were good to go. It made React feel much more approachable, and it became the standard for these reasons. That's also why, to this day, when you ask a chatbot, like I asked one of the best chatbots in the world, T3 Chat, check it out if you haven't, t3.chat, asked it, what's the easiest way to get started with building a new React app? And it said to use Create React App, even though Create React App has effectively been dead for years now. I do want to shout out one other thing CRA did right. There were two awesome things that were introduced in CRA that kind of became standards across the entire dev industry. I would argue that eject was kind of one of those things, like the thing we just ran here. No one was doing ejection from these build tools before, which was really, really cool. The two other things that were awesome were the idea of showing you an error overlay in the actual web app when you were building. So if you ran the code, you went and made a change that was broken, in the actual app itself, when you were in the browser, it would show you that an error occurred with a fancy overlay that would show you which line of code was actually affecting it. That was not a thing really before. And having that as a plugin that you could just install as a package and show in your UI was magical. And that largely started in Create React App because Dan Abramov wanted better error states. It was a really clever solution he came up with to devs having problems knowing what errored and where. Another really cool thing that got added there was the idea of hot reloading and eventually fast refreshing. Imagine you have a page, and on this page, we have a bunch of different elements we're working on. Let's say we have this sidebar. The sidebar has a bunch of items in it. But what we're primarily working on is, let's make it realistic. Let's say you're working on a chat app for some reason. Who would ever do that? Who would ever just make a OpenAI wrapper clone? That's a dumb idea. Let's say we have submitted these two chats. We'll call it chat 1 and chat 2. I submitted chat 1. I see chat 2. I realize the style is off. Chat 2 should actually be green. So I go to my code base. I change the color. I come back to my browser. It's still white. So I say, okay, that's fine. I need to refresh to see the changes. I refresh. The chat's gone because I wasn't persisting it. So now I have to send another message, get back another message, and see if it's right or wrong. Realize it's slightly off. Go back, change it, rinse and repeat. It's hell. This is okay if you persist all of your state and you don't mind refreshing. But if you have states that are complex to get into, like things that are behind an auth wall or things that involve spinning up like your webcam, like we had with ping.gg, not having hot reloading when we were building the Ping video product would have actually killed me, because when you're in a complex setup with a complex call and I'm trying to debug a CSS problem, having to refresh and reconnect to the call every time I make a change would drive me actually insane. Hot reloading was a really cool concept where it would do the refresh for you, but it wouldn't keep the state in the UI. So it would basically just trigger the refresh whenever I saved code on my computer. It's kind of like a watcher. Fast refresh was significantly cooler. Both were introduced originally in Create React App and now exist in most React toolkits and frameworks. But what happened with fast refresh is it will actually persist the state in your app. Your whole component hierarchy stays exactly the same, unless a component's definition changed, in which case everything from there down gets changed. And if your styles or whatever else change, those just get updated on the fly, which means I can make a complex state, like I can increment a counter to 50, go change the style of it, and it will keep the counter exactly where it was without having to reload the whole thing. Awesome. These were all innovations that happened in Create React App, which is why it was so important and it was also the recommendation. Because to get all of these really important functionalities outside of Create React App, you had to bring half the packages CRA was already installing or roll it yourself, which was not fun. But then we learned. We learned a lot. And what we learned was this is not all the things you have to worry about. There's a lot of other stuff that you have to think about with React. Like, how's the initial HTML being generated? How are we actually serving this data? How does this interface with our APIs? And CRA was never positioned to solve any of those problems. On top of that, CRA was built really, really heavily into Webpack. The React scripts package is a bunch of crazy Webpack hacks for everything from SVG imports to transpolations to, I don't want to think about the weird like hierarchy and bundle splitting stuff it was doing. I wouldn't wish any of that on anyone. Because of all of this, a couple different directions started to form. The biggest one, of course, is Next.js. Next.js solves pretty much all the same problems CRA does, but it also solves some additional ones, like server-client relationship, HTML creation, SSR, extending Webpack, rewrites and redirects, deployments, and so much more. Next was really originally meant to be competition to Create React App by focusing on the server-client relationship and the ability to render a page so it became static HTML. One of the biggest difference if you're using something like Next versus using something like Create React App or a Vite single page app is there will not be an HTML file in your Next code base. If you go to any of my code bases using Next, there is no .html anywhere because Next will generate HTML files based on your React code. Instead of something like CRA, where if we go to my CRA code base here, we have an HTML file. This HTML file is importing from, where's the script tag in here? Oh, The script tag gets built in by one of those Webpack hacks, but there is no script by default. That's hilarious. Oh, CRA, how cursed you are indeed. But the fact that you have to have the HTML file and then rely on a bundler to modify it at build time, it's a mess. Vite does it a good bit better, but it's still far from perfect. Ideally, the HTML is a generated asset as a result of your code if you don't actually want to have that HTML file. Next.js is in a really good state now. It is the official recommendation if you go to the react.dev docs, start a new React project. They recommend using React with a framework like Next.js or Remix or Gatsby. This is kind of weird because Remix is effectively dead temporarily because they focus on making it fully compatible with React Router again. In the future, Remix will come back in a new form, but right now it is dead, so to speak. They say it's napping. Gatsby's actually dead. Don't recommend Gatsby for anything ever, please. Expo's in a really good state, but it's almost entirely focused on mobile. And if you want server components, App Router is the only real option. They do call out that if you don't want a framework, there are options here. And all the way at the end here, they call out Vite and Parcel as solutions. I do think that Vite should get a higher up, like, by the way, if you don't want a full framework and bundler, you just want to run React in an HTML file and ship it to users, Vite's a really good option. There is value in a single page app option, which I really want to emphasize. Create React app, no concept of server rendering, no concept of generating different pages for different routes, no concept of servers really at all. If you want that, if you want something that's fully 100% client side, delete this and use Vite instead. Just delete that. It's just npx create Vite, I think, and you'll be happy. Probably your best bet. But as I've been saying for a long time now, and as existed in my old video, Create React apps mere existence in 2021. Hell, 2020 probably. Create React app existing and being public for people to use without clear, very distinct callouts saying this is deprecated, don't use it, is effectively an attack on the React community. And it's an attack that people like me get stuck dealing with the effects of most, because when a beginner hears about React through someone like me and they go and try it, they use CRA and it sucks and they have a ton of problems and they're mad about it, then they flame people like me for supporting React and telling people they should use it. It just kind of sucks that that's the case. And thankfully, it seems like now the React team agrees. There was an update from Ricky from the React team. He made 2 PRs and tried to get them done as quickly as possible. And then once they're landed, they plan to publish a new version of Create React app, specifically because of the SEO problems. Here's where we're going to go a bit into what my original plan for the video was. There was a thread over on Blue Sky complaining about how Create React app is still being recommended, and Tanner had thoughts. Tanner's the creator of React Query and a bunch of other essential React tools, TanStack Start, TanStack Router, all sorts of awesome stuff. It's 2025, and React still doesn't show Vite and Vite React as a first-class valid target, despite an ocean of developers still using Create React app for SPAs, likely never caring in the slightest about what blessed full-stack meta framework is the idiomatic way to use React. What Tanner is specifically saying here is that the number of people still using CRA shows that a lot of people do want React to be a single page app. But if they Google search how to use React as an SPA, first thing that's going to come up isn't Vite. It's going to be Create React app. And to this day, if you Google search how to create a React app, legacy reactjs.org is the first thing that comes up still with create a new React app. You get this warning that the docs are old. They did just actually add the see start a new project for the recommended ways. This was just changed because of the things that we were all talking about here. But Joe from the React team, who I really, really like overall, was upset by this post. He was upset because the docs do actually call out Vite as an option. It's under that fold that I showed before. And they're specifically avoiding pushing people towards SPAs because you need to understand the trade-offs. And I personally agree with that. If you don't know the difference between a single page app and a full stack framework, you should probably use Next.js. It is the least likely to have you do something stupid that causes problems for your users. And in the theoretical case where you did actually want a single page app, not a full stack app, once you have the knowledge to realize that, you can make the move then to something that makes more sense. But I personally think beginners starting with Next makes way more sense than them starting with Create React app. And in my opinion, makes a good bit more sense than them starting with something like Vite. That said, as much as I love Joe, did not like this comment at all, that he felt that we were spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt over this, just didn't agree. I jumped in because I really didn't agree. The problem isn't that Vite isn't mentioned. The problem is that new React app on Google still points to Create React app as the first result. We need to strongly steer people away from it. Anything less is irresponsible. Tanner cares deeply about React. He isn't spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt. He's genuinely concerned about the thousands of devs going down the wrong path because of preventable lapses in documentation. As Jacob called out, one of my OGest homies and fans, his Twitter spaces are where I got started doing all this creator stuff. He said, I've been saying this forever. I absolutely have been. This is what made it click for Joe. Thankful, very thankful. When he realized how bad it was and how many people were still reaching for Create React App, this is going to make me feel sick. I'm going to look at the NPM trends. I'm going to puke. 140,000 people a week. 140,000 invocations. Finally, Create Next App is getting slightly more, but what? Or the drop-in, Create Vite, also starting to go a little bit higher, but what? If we do all time, oh, there's that awful spike from that weird spammer dude that ruins all of this shit. God, I hate the guy who did that so much. Yeah, none of this is usable anymore because some troll spammed 8 million downloads in a week. I see people in chat saying maybe that's for old apps or people following old tutorials or whatever. I don't care. I actually don't care. Either the tutorial can have you hot swap over to Vite or Next and be fine, or it isn't. And then the tutorial should be followed anyways. But if you're following a tutorial on React that's 6 years old and it's recommending Create React App and it doesn't work when you use it with Vite instead, you should not follow that tutorial. And if you're using a tutorial that's less than 6 years old that uses Create React App, it's a shit tutorial and you should stay far away from it. If I was the one in charge, I would change the output. When you run this, it should give you an error saying, hey, this is an ancient package. You should not use this. If you're using this because of a tutorial that you watched, your tutorial is out of date. Find a better resource. If you really need to use Create React App, you have a specific reason that this is the correct solution for the problem that you have, or you're using it for legacy purposes, add -- I know what I'm doing. But there should be a specific flag you have to add to actually run Create React App after you've read the error and confirmed that you're doing this for the right reasons. I do not want anyone going through a tutorial old enough to recommend them this cursed path forward. And I'm sure once the React team hears me proposing this, there's a very high chance they're going to do it. Because once my reply on Twitter happened, and I'm sure plenty of other discussion behind the scenes on that pull request and whatever else, Ricky made it his highest priority issue to go get this handled. And finally, after far too many years of me and others complaining, Create React App is officially marked as deprecated. Do you know how good this feels to see? Do you know how awesome it is? I was waiting for this for so long. I've done so many videos. I've flamed so many people. I have yelled so many times about this for 5 years at this point. And finally, after all of this battling, Create React App is marked as deprecated. I love Ricky's commits. Fix test, fix EDE, add act, try this instead, IDK, update test, skip SVG component test, adding a message on init. Wouldn't be surprised if the good chunk of tutorials would still work. Open to being a bit more hardline there. Yeah, I think you should be more hardline there, Ricky. That's my one strong stance on this. I'm sure I can convince you. We can chat later. I think that if you really want to follow an old tutorial, you should feel some amount of friction to do it from you. Because the point here isn't to warn them. The point here is to prevent the path of least friction being a path that sends them down a doom slide. And if the easiest thing they can do is just ignore the warning, that's what they're going to do. But the goal here is to make the fast, easy path, the obvious one, the simplest thing, not send them to a bad place. And right now, if you ask an AI chatbot, even a smart one like T3 Chat, or you Google search, or you do any of these things, Create React App is still going to be the slide that you end up on. So we need to go out of our way to make sure people know to stay as far away as possible from this slide. We made huge progress today. I am so hyped to see this and to know that there will be warnings in a future version. But we need to go a tiny bit further to make sure no one will ever unknowingly spin up a project using a super deprecated, out-of-date piece of software like this again. If they want something that old and miserable to use, Angular already exists. Joking. Angular's actually been really good about updates like this recently, but hopefully you like the joke. That's all I have to say on this one. I am so thankful that Create React App is dead. This is the end of an era, and it's an era that should have ended 5 years ago. Thank you as always for watching, and until next time, peace nerds.